I'm Stuart Chaffee. We'd like to send you a DVD of this film and the book that started it all by Christopher Hitchens entitled The Trial of Henry Kissinger, plus several other gifts. What you have to do is support Link TV with a $400 contribution right now. And for those of you who like to do your own research on these topics, this book, by the way, is an excellent resource. It has the key letters and documents which were released to the public under the Freedom of Information Act. And I want to read to you a short excerpt from Christopher Hitchens' book, which is very relevant to what we're talking about. Christopher Hitchens says, during their long absence from the moral radar screen of the West, the people of East Timor could have had no better and braver friends than Amy Goodman and Alan Nairn. Joining us from New York is Amy Goodman. Hi, Amy.
It's great to be with you, Stuart.
Thank you for joining us again. Let me ask you a little bit first. Let's start with some background for people who may not know the whole history of East Timor and Indonesia. Portuguese colony back in the 1700s. How does it get involved with Indonesia?
Well, it was a Portuguese colony for more than 400 years. And then in 1975, December 7th, 1975 to be exact, Indonesia invaded East Timor, one of the largest militaries in the world, but not before. President Ford at the time and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger went to Indonesia, to Jakarta, met with the long-reigning dictator there, Suharto, and gave the green light for Indonesia's invasion of East Timor. 90% of the weapons used were from the United States. As Ford and Kissinger fly out, the Indonesian military, by land, by air, and by sea, invade East Timor, closing the country off to the outside world. The small island nation is about 300 miles north of Australia. And what ensued was one of the great genocides of the 20th century. They closed Timor off to the outside world, and over the next quarter of a century, they slaughtered the people. They killed proportionately more of the Timorese than Pol Pot killed in Cambodia. It was horrific. Did the U.S. media, did the press cover what was happening, especially given that it was done with the assent of the U.S. government, with the U.S. weapons? Did U.S. citizens know what was being done in their name? Well, the answer is, for the most part, no. And that is the responsibility of the U.S. media. The U.S. media covered Pol Pot's genocide in Cambodia because, well, Pol Pot was an official enemy of the United States, and of course the media should have covered that. But when it came to East Timor, the major difference was from Ford to Reagan from Ford to Carter to Reagan to Bush to Clinton, they were allies with Suharto. And so they didn't speak about it, and the media did not counter what the administration was saying except for a few small exposés. And so the U.S. public, who would have stopped this genocide much earlier, was kept in the dark except for independent media. It's absolutely critical what Eugene Jarecki has done. This is a fascinating documentary, The Trials of Henry Kissinger. We urge you to go to the phone right now. We ask you to stand up for independent media. You can get a copy of The Trials of Henry Kissinger. You can get a copy of Christopher Hitchens' book, The Trial of Henry Kissinger. You can get a copy of my latest book, Static, who I wrote with my brother David Goodman. It's now just out in paperback, Government Liars, Media Cheerleaders, and the People Who Fight Back. Because I have to say, in Timor, it is also a story of unbelievable resilience. A third of the population was wiped out, but the people never stopped resisting. And people all over the world, here in the United States, nationwide grassroots movement grew up. They pressed Congress. It was the East Timor Action Network. They pressed newspapers and the TV to do stories on it. In fact, from the time of the invasion to the Santa Cruz Massacre in 1991, which was 17 years later when the Indonesian military killed over 250 Timorese, ABC, NBC, CBS, none of them mentioned the words East Timor in the nightly newscasts, including the Lehrer NewsHour, for 17 years. It's why we need independent media. We ask you to give a call right now. The Trials of Henry Kissinger is a documentary that Eugene Jarecki did, dealing with Timor, dealing with Kissinger in Chile, Vietnam, and Cambodia. This is a documentary that is devastating, fascinating, that will educate you. Christopher Hitchens' book is very, very important, and you can get a copy of Static. The 2 books and the DVD for $400 if you call right now. please go to the phone. Let us know that you are there. Let us know you're standing up for independent media.
All right, Amy, thank you. And of course, you were one example of independent media that did know what was going on in East Timor. And I want to ask you a little bit about that. I know later on in 1995, you confronted Kissinger publicly about what his role and the U.S. government's role was there. What was that confrontation like with him?
Well, Henry Kissinger was releasing one of his books. I can't remember. I think it was Diplomacy at the time. And, well, I was there, journalist Alan Nairn was there, and Constancio Pinto was there. Constancio Pinto was a long-time Timorese activist. He's now consul general in Washington, D.C. He was a part of the resistance for many years, lost so many in the Timorese community. And there was Henry Kissinger in New York at the Learning Annex doing a presentation. And we were talking about the missing chapter. We didn't see a chapter on Timor. So when they came to the Q&A, to the question and answer, Constancio stood up and he said, Mr. Kissinger, I wanted to ask why you did what you did to the people of East Timor. And Kissinger got absolutely furious. And then Alan Nairn stood up. He was next in line for the questions. And Kissinger wanted to go quickly away from Constancio Pinto. And Alan held up the documents that showed that meeting that you've just watched on this documentary, The Trials of Henry Kissinger. The meeting where after December 7th, 1975, as Kissinger and Ford flew out and came back to the United States, the State Department was cabling Kissinger and saying, what is happening here is brutal. We're not going to be able to justify it to Congress. They're going to cut off the weapons sales. So when Kissinger got back to the United States, he holds a high-level meeting with his high-level State Department officials, and he tells them, we are not going to kick our ally in the teeth, castigating those high-level State Department officials who put the writing in the cable, who left that paper trail. That is the document that is so important. And interestingly, as you see highlighted, the person who is the note taker at that meeting, who was learning at his mentor's knee, was L. Paul Bremer, who later went on to become the proconsul of Iraq. Yes, the story continues. Jerry Bremer. Folks, we urge you to go to the phone right now and let us know you're there. So Alan asked him about these documents, and I asked him, as a board member of Freeport-McMoRan, a U.S. gold and copper mining corporation in this country that has been wreaking havoc in Indonesia, if he would stop them from lobbying against those who wanted to cut off weapons sales to Indonesia at that time. The U.S. selling weapons to the Indonesian military, which were being used to repress the Timorese. One after another, we asked those questions, and we were taken out by security. We were put out on the street by the police. Well, I think it's critical to ask these questions. You know, the press that was there was the Portuguese press because they cared. They had abandoned Timor, and now they continue to cover the situation as Indonesia occupied it. Where was the U.S. press? One of the great genocides of the 20th century. We urge you to go to the phone right now. We ask you to stand up for independent media. We ask you to let us know that you are there. Please go to your phone. Make that call. Make it now. The number to call, please go, 866-485-8848. 866-485-8848. It is a devastating documentary, The Trials of Henry Kissinger, a film by Alex Gibney and Eugene Jarecki. The film is yours. Christopher Hitchens' book, on which it's based, The Trial of Henry Kissinger, as well as my book, Static, Government Liars, Media Cheerleaders, and the People Who Fight Back. Make that call. Make it now. Stand up for independent media. Please make your call. Make that phone call now. That number again, 866-485-8848, 866-485-8848. Make the call that makes the difference. You make it possible for Link TV to continue.
Amy, I want to ask you one more question about your involvement in Timor. It's difficult enough being independent media in general, but in your particular case, you kind of risked your life covering this story. I want to ask you about 1991 when you were there at the massacre at Dili and what you went through. Tell us what that was like.
Well, that was 17 years into the occupation. Very little media coverage in this country. And yet we knew what was happening there was happening through the barrel of a U.S. weapon. I went there in 1990 with my colleague Alan Nairn. We went back in 91. He was writing for the New Yorker magazine. I was doing a documentary for Pacifica Radio. It was November 12, 1991. The Indonesian military had killed yet another young Timorese. His name was Sebastião Gomes. The funeral was held. 1,000 people came out on the streets. 2 weeks later, thousands of people marched to commemorate his death 2 weeks earlier. They started at the Motael Church in Dili, the capital of East Timor. They went to Mass in the morning, and then thousands came out into the street. Girls in their traditional, women in their traditional Timorese garb, girls in their Catholic school uniforms, boys in their Catholic school shorts, and they walked, and they unfurled banners, and on those banners